Well, anyone that has turned on LED lights will tell you the number one thing that goes wrong is the plants turn yellow and they look like they're dead. Massive nutrient deficiency. And of course, if you stand back and say, well, yeah, I'm basically putting the pedal to the metal, pushing the gas with more light to get the plants to grow more vigorously. And plant growth is a combination of carbohydrate production and nutrients working together to give us plant growth. Okay. So if you got all the carbohydrates, but you didn't fix the nutrient problem, what do you got? Nothing. You got someone sitting in the driveway with their foot on the gas and their other foot on the brake, and you're just sitting there spinning your wheels. So one of the things that goes wrong that people really need to be thinking about is their nutrition program basically has to be reevaluated and reconsidered and stepped up a lot to basically increase, because you've increased your growth rate and you're still feeding right here. Guess what you've got? Nothing. But if you bring up your feed levels, all of a sudden you've got the two in balance and away you go. Because remember, for years you've been developing this nutrition feed program, when you feed, what you feed, how much you feed, all of these different aspects based on the fact that it was dark in January and it was bright in July. In fact, all of you have done this. You change your feed program as you go through the seasons, right? Because the light gets better. Well, all of a sudden you put on 12 moles per day. Those plants are growing like they are in the middle of May, when it's ambient is always 12 moles. So what happens? Well, the young leaves basically become chlorotic. Notice the older foliage is nice and green because there's plenty of nitrogen. Nitrogen accumulates in the old foliage, but it's the young leaves that are just don't have those nutrients. The middle and lower leaves might get some purpling, and of course, one of the things is we see is it appears usually in vegetative cuttings, usually about a week after sticking. And there's a reason for it. We'll get to that in a second. And then also in seedlings, we start seeing it probably about at the second true leaf. The first true leaf usually is okay, but at the second and subsequent true leaves, you start seeing all of these problems. And like in petunias, when you start doing this, you'll start seeing it a little bit later, but the purpling will definitely be in the oldest foliage first. The rule of thumb is once you turn chlorotic, it's really difficult to correct. Remember how I said you really want during young plant production, you want to make sure everything is uniform and consistent, because if it's not, then you're just spending all of your time, which is money, trying to fix a problem you should not have had. So let's really, when you turn on lights, and this is an easy fix, it's just a different mindset. The iron and manganese, and it's not iron, and it's not manganese, it's iron and manganese, and we'll see in a minute why, is basically becomes limiting, and now this is deficiency. When I see this white, I'm basically, people say it's iron. I said, no, it's not, it's manganese. How do you know? Well, I put iron on it and it keeps coming back. I put it on, it's like a drug. I turn green, I turn yellow. I turn green, I turn yellow. Well, its reason is that iron and manganese can be interchanged. In a minute, you'll see where. And so, but they it's not stable because they don't need it. It doesn't work. You got to have a balance of iron and manganese. And it's really important in our crops to have this iron manganese balance inside the plants. Okay. So obviously you've got to up your game and feed more iron and manganese, and usually use a supplemental. Most vegetative propagators and seedling producers do have a custom micro package for their operation, their water, to basically deliver the manganese and iron that they need. But phosphorus is also important, and it's very important in the carbohydrate. So you get all these sugars produced, but sugars by themselves are useless. You have to get them into starch and carbohydrates and proteins and all this other stuff that allows plants to grow. And phosphorus sits in the middle of making that happen. So it's very important. That's why these three nutrients, manganese, Mn, iron, and phosphorus, are critical in successful lighting installations. Now, just a note, why some unrooted cuttings and not others? Well, in the unrooted cuttings are growing very, very rapidly, and manganese and iron uptake is fairly slow because it's taken up through the roots, and it has to be translocated from the roots to the leaves to the growing point. So it just takes time. And so if they're harvesting cuttings very aggressively during the peak season, you just don't have enough time to get enough iron, manganese, and phosphorus into those cuttings, even though they're putting it on at fairly high rates, to get them in there. So there's enough to make them green in the bag, but then when you set them down and you put them under stress of very high light condition, bam, they basically go deficient, because all of a sudden you push the pedal to the metal and the plants are growing with all the light, but then there's not sufficient reserves. So that's why you need to really be focused. Now,